To everyone else, they were Italian. But to each other, they weren't. Same neighborhoods, same jobs. So why, when they spoke, didn't it even sound like the same language? Because what people called Italian wasn't what they actually spoke. Many of them grew up speaking completely different dialects, and some had never even heard standard Italian before. So even though they were seen as one people, to each other, they could sound like complete strangers. And it didn't stop with language. In everyday life, they stayed separate. People married within their own regions. A Sicilian would marry another Sicilian. A Neapolitan would marry a Neapolitan. They kept their own traditions, their own customs, and often chose to stay separate. Not by accident, those differences still mattered. And that separation didn't just disappear. And when something went wrong, they didn't always go to the police. They handled things inside their own communities. Disputes, conflicts, even serious problems were often settled by people they trusted. Because for many of them, outsiders were not the first option. And over time, these systems became more organized, more structured, more influential. In some situations, they carried real authority. So if they stayed separate in so many ways, what actually brought them together? And this showed up most clearly in how they worked. Jobs didn't spread randomly. They followed trust. A contractor would hire people he already knew, often from the same town, sometimes from the same family network. New arrivals didn't go through open hiring. They were pulled in by someone from their own circle. That's how entire chains formed. One person gets in, then brings a brother, a cousin, a neighbor. Soon, whole crews spoke the same dialect, shared the same habits, and answered to the same small network of people. In some trades, these networks became so tight that getting in without a connection was almost impossible. So even inside one city, work wasn't just work. It was a closed system. And those systems didn't just provide jobs. They controlled access to them. There was something else happening at the same time. Inside their own communities, people didn't call themselves Italian. They used more specific identities. Sometimes it was a region, sometimes even a village. That's how they introduced themselves. That's how they built trust. That's how they knew who was one of them. But outside those communities, none of that existed. In newspapers, in census records, in job listings and city directories, they were all labeled the same way. Italian. No explanation, no detail, just one word. At work, employers didn't separate them by origin. They hired Italians. In housing records, entire buildings were listed under the same label. In schools, children were grouped together as one category. And in the press, that image became even simpler. Stories didn't describe differences. They didn't explain backgrounds. They just repeated the same idea: Italians. Again and again. Until that label became the only thing people saw. It made everything easier for the outside world, but it erased everything inside. So while within their own circles, those distinctions still mattered. From the outside, they were already being treated as one group. And the more that label was used, the harder it became to ignore. Not because it was precise, but because it was everywhere. And when you look closer, you see it wasn't just about jobs. It was about survival. Many immigrants didn't trust banks or couldn't even use them. So they created their own systems of support. Money was borrowed inside the community. Debts were tracked informally. Help came from people who knew you, not from institutions. There were mutual aid societies, local clubs, informal agreements that replaced official systems. If someone lost work, got sick, or needed help, they didn't go outside. They went inside the network, and over time, those networks didn't just help people. They started to organize power. Who gets a job? Who gets support? Who gets left out? In some situations, those decisions mattered more than anything official. And one of the strongest places where these networks showed up wasn't work, it was religion. Churches weren't just places to pray. Different groups often built their own churches, sometimes just a few blocks apart. Because they followed different traditions, honored different saints, and kept different customs. Even festivals were separate. Processions, celebrations, local feasts. They weren't shared equally between everyone. Each group organized their own events, raised their own money, and invited their own people. These weren't just traditions. They were ways to stay connected, to meet, to exchange information, to maintain influence inside their own circles. So even something that looked unified from the outside, like religion, was still divided on the inside. But the biggest change didn't happen right away. It happened with the next generation. Children didn't grow up the same way. They went to American schools, learned English earlier, spent time outside their parents' communities. For them, those old regional differences started to matter less. Not because they disappeared, but because something else became more important. They were no longer just from one village or one region. They were growing up in the same system, the same schools, the same streets, the same country. And slowly, a broader identity began to form. Not forced from the outside, but built over time.